John Marco Allegro was a scholar who was also he was an agnostic. He was agnostic, but he was an ordained minister. So he became an ordained minister, and then he started studying theology, and eventually became agnostic. But he was a language expert, and so he was hired to decipher the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they did it for 14 years. He deciphered these things. They're putting together these. They had to use DNA because they had to make sure that the cow, the fragments were from the same cow, which would indicate that it was the same piece of skin.
Okay.
Because it's literally on animal skins. They
Right,
found
right,
them in
right.
these ceramic vessels in Qumran, hidden in the side of a mountain. Wild shit. So they take these down. They realize this is the oldest version of the Bible by far. And I think it's in Aramaic. It's one of the only ones in Aramaic. And at the end of this translation, over 14 years, John Marco Allegro writes a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. And he says the entire religion was a misunderstanding. And what it was originally about was psychedelic mushrooms and fertility rituals. And that's what created this religion. These people were taking mushrooms, and they were experiencing God, and they were having fertility rituals because they were trying to be as bountiful and have as many babies as possible. And that's what the Bible was originally all about. Now, by the way, it's heavily disputed. A lot of people don't agree with them. A lot of people think it's blasphemy and it's this and it's that. But the fact remains that this guy was a legit scholar, rock solid credentials, not a drug addict, not a guy who even did psychedelics. But it was his interpretation after all this time that a lot of the things in the story had meanings that would go back to psychedelic mushrooms. And one of them was the word Christ. He said you could trace the word Christ back to an ancient Sumerian word that meant a mushroom covered in God's semen.
What?
They thought that when it rained, it was the Lord putting semen on the earth, and that's why things would grow from the rain. And one of the things that would grow is these mushrooms, like overnight. So overnight, they'd find these psilocybin mushrooms and these Amanita muscaria mushrooms, like on cow shit, and they'd pick them up and they'd eat them and they'd trip balls. And so they wanted to protect that and hide that from intruders, and they hid it in stories and allegories, and this was his assertion.
Well, that's the thing, too. Like, first of all, that's amazing.
Wild,
it's
right?
Wild, yeah.